You ready to get this thing going?
Yeah. Thank you.
Welcome to my darkest hour, the best podcast of all time. And this podcast is hosted by myself, Leclerc Andre. Joining me is my co-host, as always, the one and only Cab Washington.
Yeah.
And joining us, we have a very special guest. One of my favorite people in the whole world, my tea partner,
Yes.
Katie Boyle.
And I'm having coffee today, though. I've Americanized after 8 years.
Oh, yeah. Today's the day. It's a big day.
No, well, this summer particularly. And I also have ADD, so it's not great. But it is fun. It's like my drug, you know? Does that make sense? Because I don't take pills for the ADD. But anyway, as a side note.
Yeah.
But I started drinking coffee. I started drinking in the pandemic and stopped because I was like, this is too wild.
Yeah.
And then I started again in like August. And now I'm like, if I don't have a cup a day. So on top of like 10 cups of tea. So I'm a little bit wired lately.
10 cups.
Yeah.
Like, actually?
Yeah. Because my boyfriend will wake me up with a cup of tea because he's well trained. Because it's sweet hair.
He's
and
a
then
puppy.
it's the only way to get me out of bed as well, because I'll sleep until like forever. And then I'll have like 2 before I shower. So 2 more. So that's 3 at least before I shower. And then I have another one before I leave. And then I usually buy one. And then I have a few more when I go back home.
Are these like hot teas? You're just like
hot tea?
dousing it, just like good, like
Yeah. Well, I used
hot
to
tea,
smoke.
just-
Wait, do that again?
you're just like guzzling hot tea.
Yeah,
just like
yeah.
it's not hot enough. Like
Yeah. Oh no, I will complain if it's not hot enough as well.
Wow.
Because you know, so you go to some places and like I won't complain to them, but I will in my head. I'm still Irish, so I don't have that white woman mentality that they have here. I wish that seems like a superpower.
Katie Karen Boyle, got it.
Yeah, no. Katie quietly complained in my head. You see, that's why I was, my therapist is like, use your voice. But anyway, so the tea. Yeah, I drink a lot of tea. But I used to smoke cigarettes, but I always drank tea growing up. But I do feel like I'd probably drink like 3 more cups extra because they're quitting cigarettes.
Yeah.
Because it's just like a hand fixation mouth thing.
200%. It's an ADD thing, I think, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's
struggle
more
with that too.
I think it's an oral fixation.
Yeah. But I think that's like kind of comboed, right?
It could be a little bit of both. I just know that. Do you drink a lot of water?
No.
See, so she uses tea and coffee as like her way of getting her fluids. So like my wife, she drinks a lot of water, right, all the time. But if it wasn't water, it would be something else.
Got
it'd be so everybody has their thing. I'm glad it's tea for you. Tea's a healthy thing. It could be wine. Or something toxic, right? It could be tequila.
I wish someone would come on here and be like, man, I just drink so much. This is oral fixation issue for me.
Yeah, it's not the alcohol.
I really I don't even like it. It's just around,
I think as well, it's just something to just ground you for a second, to just, because it's really hard to concentrate sometimes, or like, it's something to just sit down, drink it, like chill you out a bit for a second.
Katie is one of the, like, you ever meet a person and they're just consistent? And like not just consistent, like, oh,
he's giving me the light.
I'm giving myself the light.
Right.
She's like,
wrap it up. Right.
She's like very steady. So like that's one thing I can appreciate about people is like a person that every time you see them, every time you're around them, they're always give you the same consistent energy. It's not, they're not moody, they're not up and down, they're not hot and cold. Katie's really consistent, and not only is she consistent, but she's always up.
It's truly aspirational. Honestly.
Yeah, she's always up. She's always like in a good
spirits. That's so nice after you just saw me not up for about 5 minutes. I'm up unless something's starting 30 minutes late. Just because I think too with the ADD you plan out your day. So it was like I should have realized this and planned out, because you literally plan out your dinner and stuff. So just for the listeners, we started a little late and I was like already anticipating that I'm like my dinner.
You got a reputation already.
Yeah, right.
You should be called the Dark Late podcast. I mean, if this is my period, you guys.
Follow Running Late comedy show on Instagram.
No, we're not promoting.
But you're the same, Leclerc. And you're the same too. You always have a very positive, happy energy. So I think we all like vibe really well. There's no like, because I've been struggling a bit lately with people who are like, they'll bring a certain energy and then later on they'll be like, how do I explain this, like I wasn't actually happy, or I was mad that you said, and you're kind of like, what the that's not, I don't read minds. So or like making mountains out of molehills, is that
right?
Well, that's a good term that I have
my dad
idea
says
if
that
it fits that way,
I don't know. You like making people, I don't know if everybody's like traumatized from the pandemic or something, but people are a little sensitive. It's a little eggshelly right now if it's online, if it's in real life.
Definitely kid gloves you have to walk with.
Yeah. I definitely am the type of person, like, if I'm annoyed, I'll just say it and then it's done with. And if I'm happy, I'm happy. There's no fucking hidden agenda. So when people aren't like that, I'm like, oh God.
Yeah.
Can't deal with this.
Yeah. Katie will tell me about like really crazy stuff that's happening in her life.
Yeah.
And I'm always so dumbfounded because you wouldn't be able to tell that she's going through a rough patch just by the way she conducts herself on the day to day. Like I'll still see her at shows. She'll come in, she's happy, she's smiling, hugging everybody. She kills on stage and then she gets off. And she's like, yeah, my cat died. It's like, what the
touch wood, I have a cat. He's at home. I love him very much.
Yeah.
But no, I also think as well that people need to, like you give a therapist an hour a week and you pay them, and people need to learn that boundary, because if I were like, people are always like, oh, you're so happy all the time. And I'm like, yeah, like I'm not happy all the time, but it's not for me to put that on you. Do you know, sort of way? Like, unless you're like, let's sit down, let's have a coffee. Like, hey, can I talk to you about some stuff? Right. But yeah, I don't think it's okay to like emotionally dump on somebody, or I don't know. Yeah, I just kind of like... Yeah, I don't. You do see that sometimes in comedy where people are like, as comedians, are like rude to you, and it's like, this isn't about me.
Yeah,
it is. Take that shit home.
Yeah, and that's people in general. Like,
yeah. I'm sure we just see it because we're in comedy, but it's definitely people in general too. Yeah.
If I didn't know Katie as well as I do, I would think she's never had like to even deal with a train delay. Right. Like just it never rains when she's outside. Yeah. It's just
I dealt with a train delay too. I was so stressed coming to you guys. Yeah. That's what I was saying. I like ran to get here, so that's why when it was late, I was like, the fucking trains stress me out so much.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do deal with train delay. How do you say delays?
Oh, that's almost it.
Delays.
Train delays.
Train delays.
I was on a live in the pandemic, and it was this comedian who's like superly awkward. And he was like, you're just so positive and happy. Like, obviously, you've had the best childhood. And I was like, no, I had a really terrible childhood. And then he was like, oh, and I was like, it's fine. Like, and he was like, he was just like, oh, I'm so sorry, I shouldn't have brought it up. It just, you seem so happy. And I was like, yeah, because anything's better than what it was before. So of course I'm happy now. But he kept being like really uncomfortable. And I was like, I wouldn't be talking. It's okay. And then that's the annoying part when someone hears that you have, like, if people hear I don't speak to my mother, they're like, and all of a sudden I'm like, I'm okay, it's okay, we're okay. So then I have to like reassure the person because they're so like uncomfortable.
Yeah.
People put their foot in their mouths like that all the time. It's not with me. People are like, yeah, so tell me about your dad. I'm like, he died. And they're like, oh, it's like,
it's fine.
I didn't even know that nigga. It's like,
here's $100.
Like, that's the worst part. That's the part I hate about it, where you then have to use the mental energy to be like, no, I'm fine, ha ha ha, you know?
Yeah, but then you find yourself consoling them because they're lazy and clumsy with their line of questioning. It's like, this isn't, you're just being an idiot.
And I don't even think necessarily that they're lazy. They just don't know, and they come from a different, the next part though, where they got all like, is like, oh, you don't have the ability now to step into someone else's shoes.
Yeah.
Because obviously you would have just, if you weren't comfortable saying my dad died, you would have just been like, anyway, I gotta go to the toilet, you know? So like, they don't realize that it's fine. We're talking about it. It's grand. It's not a big deal.
Trust me. Yeah. I've processed this for the last however many years. Don't worry. Yeah.
Yeah.
What has been like a rough time in your life where like you had to put on appearances, but you were really going through it?
I would say when I cut out my mother, that was pretty rough.
Yeah.
That was definitely, I definitely like felt like pretty suicidal. Don't do it. Because I love my life now. And that is like, I always think of this saying, like, with time, you know, if you just give things time, and I think we just don't ever give things time. If it's like an argument with a friend or an argument in a relationship, like, or a breakup, like with time, everything gets better. So with that, like, I was really depressed, but in time it was better, do you know? So I'm glad I didn't do anything. But that was pretty hard, and I had to pretend like everything was okay because nobody wanted to fucking listen to it. And I grew up in a place where people don't want to fucking hear about it. And I remember someone who was very close to me, and I want to say who, but let's say like a grandfather type, I'm being like, oh yeah, I'm just like really sad all the time and I can't explain it. And he was like, nobody wants to hear that, you know? Just like lock it up and move on. Which is like funny, but not by your reactions. But I'm hoping the listeners think it's funny. But yeah, so it's just like a kind of thing where, and it is true to a certain point, people don't really want to hear it. You know, they don't want to. They don't want to catch it off you.
No.
So that was pretty hard because I had to just make face and go to college and pretend, or like, you know, go to school at the time. I would do my leaving cert, which is like the SATs, and just pretend like everything was okay while
it's like high school age kind of.
It's like high school. So I walked out of my mother's house one day, and then she is absolutely the worst mentally unwell, but might be also possessed. I just don't know if I fully prescribe to the mentally unwell part, because she's also a demon. And
it's easier to believe that she's possessed by a demon than mentally ill. I think it's a double, honestly.
Right.
Well, it's just because like the mentally unwell part, it's, you know, I know it is mentally unwell, and Ireland, it was such a place where you'd rather be you'd rather be undiagnosed and crazy than diagnosed and take the pills, which really annoys me, because it'd be so much better if she had gotten the help that she need. I still think if she did and she took the pills, I still think she'd be a cunt, because she's just also a terrible person, you know. And I gave her 18 years, and people were horrible to me when I left, because that side of the family, so around this time, that side of the family were harassing me because they didn't want her to be their problem, because she's losing her mind. She's like flipping out to her sisters and her brothers, and they're just like, oh, it's your responsibility. How dare you leave at 18? Like, fuck off. So I'm still in school, and I had to go from my dad's house, which was 2 hours away, every day to school, like try to avoid her on the walk to school, then go to school, pretend like everything's okay, when I knew that she was coming into the school, and like talking to the career guidance counselor. Like the career guidance counselor called me and said, I heard you're not speaking to your mother while her mother has been diagnosed with cancer. This is how I found out my grandmother had cancer. I didn't fucking know. Convenient. But she actually did have cancer. But I was like, all right, well, this is the first time hearing about it, but still, it's not my fucking responsibility. That doesn't mean I deserve to be emotionally abused in my house. And then the career guidance counselor goes, how would you feel if your mother hung herself? You'd really regret that you never resolved it.
What the hell, bro?
Wait. So I swear to God, and I hung up the. I know, right? This is pretty dark. This isn't even on my list of dark stories.
We're just warming up.
Yeah. So I hung up the phone. I called my dad, and my dad was like, "This is fucking insane." So he called her, and he was like, "Firstly, my child is an adult. She's 18. This is none of your fucking business. Secondly, aren't you a career guidance counselor? If you speak one more word to my child," because I was in school for 3 more months to do the SATs type of thing or whatever. He was like, "I will tell the principal what you said, because you'll get fired for this, because you're not a guidance counselor, and if you're not a therapist, and if you were the therapist, because you're just career, but if you were a therapist, you'd be talking to my." And the fact that he was also like, the fact that you guys didn't notice this abuse for years, and now you're taking them, that's insane. Like, she's your priority. So then I left school for 3 months and just studied at home, and we would just go in the odd day. I would study at my dad's, and good point. I got 220 points in my mocks. Highest you can get 600 at that time. So I was like, 200 was failing. So then that's like your fake test when I was living with my mother. When I moved down to my dad, studied by myself. Also, because the ADD get really distracted in school, so that would have just helped anyway. But still, like a nice environment where there's like love and shit.
Love and shit.
and not like a dish going to be thrown at you randomly every 5 minutes. You know,
walk past that.
So but then when I sat my test and I got my results, I got 445. So I did 225 points higher in the space of 3 months.
100% better.
Yeah, that's crazy, right? And then when we were doing our test, that career guidance counselor came in and she looked at me and she goes, "Are you okay?" But the guy in front of me, who was a real nerd and was like banging his pencil, was like, "I'm fine. Why would you ask that? I'm stressing out." And then she just walked out. I was like, geek interception.
Peter, whoever it was.
Yeah, that was Alex. If you ever listen to this, thanks, Alex. I think he ended up being like an architect. I think he's killing it. But that was the thing. I had to pretend like for years as well. I had to pretend like everything was okay, because I remember a therapist talking to me about it and saying a little bit, but then her saying something to my mother, and my mother just, that was it. That was like never. I was like 13. I was never going to hear the end of it. It was another reason for her to be abusive. So that trained me, don't fucking tell anybody, because it'll get back to her and it's going to make your life a living hell. And just when you're 18, walk out that door. So, and that's what I did. I walked out with a maths book because that's what was in my school bag. And I went back one time to get clothes, but other than that, I have nothing from my childhood. No stuff or anything, because I was just like, everything's obtainable. I don't need this shit. I just need to be away from her. So, but yeah, that was pretty tough. Had to show face.
I feel like bad moms get so much. They get so many passes. People who have no idea what the inner workings of that relationships are, they'll just assume that it's the child's responsibility to make sure it's a healthy relationship with their mom. But it's like some moms are just bad people.
They are.
Like truly awful people and don't deserve any relationships. Like people have to understand, like whatever relationship you have with your parents when you're a youth, like when you're under their household, is one thing. The relationships that you have with your parents as an adult is a direct reflection of who they are as adults. Because that's a friend. If you don't want to be friends with your parents as an adult, it means they just weren't good people to you when you were a kid. But usually kids, like, they'll grow up into adulthood and they understand that their relationship has changed with their parents. And they're like, oh, I still want this person in my life. Not because they have to feed and protect me and give me shelter, but because I know them to be a good person. But when you reach adulthood, it's like, yo, I never want to see this person again. They're probably a piece of shit. They're probably a nasty individual.
You're probably not. Odds are you're not being a selfish for just like cutting this person out of your life.
Because like we have instinctually, we want to show gratitude, especially as children. We want to show appreciation for the person who's taking care of us, got us to this point. The fact that like you can have a person in your life that you can acknowledge, like, hey, thank you for everything that you've done, but I never want to see you again. I never want to talk to you again. You're not a good person. You're not kind. And I don't feel like you know how to love people properly.
And I think that people put a lot of pressure because they'll be like, oh, well, they gave birth to you. And it's like, well, A, that was irresponsible. And B, it's not my fault. But it's like, it doesn't mean you're owed their life. And like, it's so true what you say, because with my dad, he's like so sweet. And like, he's not fucking, here's the thing. I love my dad. My dad's great. And I'm sure if my mother were, she'd probably like, she puts him on a pedestal. I do not. Because, he probably shouldn't have left when I was 5. But also, as an adult, I'm like, he would have killed her if he didn't. So the man has the patience of the saint to stay till 5. Do you know what I mean? Because she used to push him a lot and be like, you should hit me. So like the fact, I know that he had to do that, if that makes sense. But I still don't think he's perfect. But he is like one of my best friends. Like I go to him for like advice. He's so sweet. And when I left, my aunts were like, one of them like, kind of showed up at my friend's house while I was there. And she was like, your father's not going to pay for college. Like we were going to pay. He's not going to look after you. Now he did pay for college. And fast forward years later, I just got a commercial that was like quite a good chunk of money. And my brothers and sisters are going to college. And I did call him and I was like, I don't need it right now. I don't know what the future is going to hold, but if you guys need any money for my brothers and sisters, go to call it. And he was like, I'm not even having this conversation. And he's like, and I know he's not doing that great with money, but the fact is that he wouldn't accept it because he's like, no, that's like not on you. You have to live your life. Whereas they portrayed him as this man who wouldn't have paid for my college, who just, who didn't, but like, look at it 15 years later, I'm like offering him this money. And I'm like, I'd love to help out back. Like, that's like you feel as the immigrant role. And he's like, no, but it's just funny because if she wasn't such a cunt, you might have a little bit of money now. But like, so that's the thing. I think you're right. I always say to people, like, I was trying to make a joke out of it, but I couldn't. And it was like how when people are very confused why I don't speak to my mother, and it's like, it's not like she didn't buy me a pony. It must be really bad if I'm not speaking to my own mother. Or that joke you have about how like you made me do this. Which is like classic abuser, like don't let me, or why do you make me get so angry? They're also so hacked. They're like these abusers.
They say stuff like, this is gonna hurt me more than it's gonna hurt you.
That's it.
But what I found, especially in my experience, is that like there's this through line where a lot of parents will say, like, when they do spank you or abuse you in any way, they're like, they'll try to make it like, I didn't want to do this.
Right.
But you did want to do this because you have options. There's disciplinary options. You have so many avenues you chose this avenue. You chose to put your hands on me. You chose to use this language against me, right? You chose to weaponize our relationship. So I never buy into that. Like anytime I see it, like, ever see like a kid getting beat in public, like on the subway?
Right.
The mom is never beating them because they're never beating them because like it's the best option. They're beating them because they're frustrated with themselves.
100%.
Like
because they haven't gotten the skills to maybe.
When my mom gave me whoopings, it's never after a great day at work. Never.
And I have to say,
she never like got promoted. Like guys, I got raised at work. get in here. Let me beat that ass. It's like, no, she had a bad
still ain't
day
clean up them dishes. Come on there. Come here.
And it is like you do have to discipline your kids. So I can imagine being a parent, it must be really, really hard to try and discipline your kids. But I do see like the way my dad disciplined my brothers and sisters, and it wasn't, he never like hit them, or he didn't emotionally abuse them, and he didn't like gaslight, or like, you know, he also wasn't perfect. Sometimes he can get like a little defensive or whatever, and that's something me and my brothers and sisters are like, all right, but that's just because he's trying so hard to be. But like, I mean, that's like a minor thing, but what he would do is he would just say, like, he would just put them on the step and they would just do a timeout, and it's such a basic, amazing like way to discipline your kids, because they're bored, they're outside, they're left alone with their thoughts, and you just give them a timeout for a while. And my brothers and sisters are all like highly fucking educated, like they're goal driven. They all had jobs from 14. That was another thing, he just made them go have jobs early. So it's like there is a way to like discipline your kids without fucking traumatizing them as well. And you just put them into sports too, that tires them out. That's a great way to so like, so for parents who are like getting so frustrated where you have to, there is other options. Put them in sports, distract them, put them in a timeout.
There's unnecessary reverence towards parenting, like that is so passed down. Like my mom is such a critic of herself because of her maternal figure, which is her aunt. Like used to just say whatever came to her mind, like, Linda, you're fat, Linda, you're not doing this, or Linda, you need to do that. So in her mind, I'm always like, Mom, why do you listen to her? She's like, oh, but she when my parents died, you know, she was the only one that was there for me. So I'm like, so you have reverence for someone, so you find it almost justified and respectful for yourself to take and endure this pain. Like that doesn't make any sense. So a lot of it is like passed on. And like being active, knowing that you should be the one to change the pattern. You know?
My dad, I have a joke about it, because there was one time when we were locked in the bathroom, because that's what we would do. I remember actually telling someone about this and then hearing it in their set about how like, oh my god, this Irish girl would have to lock, and I'm like, all right, don't fucking take my but you know, whatever. Thankfully he has a different punchline.
Wait,
but I'm
what?
like,
He's like, this Irish girl, he started with that.
And he said that it was like someone wrote a comment on a YouTube clip, and I went and looked, and I was like, because me and my dad were in the audience, and my dad was like, is that us? And I was like, yep. But I'd say what happened was we talked about it, he subconsciously, and was like, where did I hear that? It must have been, because I checked the YouTube, there was no fucking comment. No, but he did have a great punchline. It was about how Irish people they're only locked in the bathroom. Anyway, I probably shouldn't tell it in case you guys figure out who it is, but anyway, I know how podcast listeners can be fucking detectives, because I've gotten in trouble for this shit before. But anyway, side note, we would lock ourselves in, my dad would lock us in the bathroom, and one time she was like throwing herself up against the door like a demon. That's pretty werewolfy. And so he was like holding the door closed. It is. And he was having a cigarette, and he looked at me and he goes, I was like 5, and he goes, I hope you're learning how not to behave. And I mean, it's been a great lesson. I have dated a lot of abusive men, but that's because I feel very comfortable in that zone. Not anymore. Leland's amazing. I'm in therapy.
Yada yada.
But I would never raise my voice. I've never thrown anything at anyone. I've never like once I threw a phone on the floor, but in the whole grand scheme of life, that's not a lot. But the other side, so you do learn how not to behave. So like I've never cheated. I've never slept with someone's husband. I don't gaslight, because I see it. I know this is the thing. I know how to gaslight. I know how to manipulate. I know, because I've seen it in action, and I've always chose, I'm not going to do that. I'm not, and I can see when people do it too, and I'm like, I know what you're doing.
That thing that you're doing is that always happens to me. Like,
but so the other side too is parents who are too nice to their kids and treat them like adults. I also think that's abusive. Because I mean, not abusive, but I think it's bad for the kids in the future. You see these kids and they're like throwing stuff at a person, and they're like, that means they like you, and it's like, no, fucking discipline your kid. Like I do think there's another side to it where you can't be best friends with your kids while they're kids.
100%.
I think that
I just said a lot.
The opposite of the abuse isn't like necessarily delegation or.
I mean, coddling never.
Don't coddle your kids either. You might listen to this and go, oh fuck, I should let my kid have the run of the mill. No. I don't know why I'm coming with all these old Irish sayings. No one lives in a mill.
I think
humans is pretty popular here.
I think humans just in general respond well to boundaries, especially in those formative years. It's just, what are those boundaries going to be, right? And I feel like
those look different for different kids.
Absolutely. I think you should treat every kid differently. Like, I don't think that every kid is going to respond to every type of disciplinary action the same way. So I think it makes a lot of sense to try different things with different kids, and whatever a kid responds to, keep doing that. But I think that a lot of parents, where they really mess up is this idea that they think they can be an abuser and a protector, because your child's going to see you as one of the two. Right. So in the event that you're abusing your child consistently, they're going to see you as a person who is dangerous. So in the event that child gets abused by somebody else, they're not going to look to you to defend them, because they know that you're also an abuser. So those children are often the ones who harbor so much internal violence, and they're the ones who are taking in all this damage, and they have no one to go to, because they know their parents are going to hit them for getting hit by somebody else, or they're going to be mad at them for getting assaulted by somebody else. So it's like, what do you do?
It's so true, because everything like my mother did, thankfully, like nothing happened outside, but in later life it did definitely mean that I was with abusive men and thought that was love, or like I was assaulted, and I actually didn't know it was assault for a few years, so I stayed friends with that guy. But then the Americans taught me the ways. I'm like, okay. But so better to keep that guy out of my... But my point is that, like, so with my mother, she would do things that I later learned was like what like the American army will do to get questions. Like, what's it called?
Interrogate.
Like emotional terrorism. Like stuff like, like you're... Like I could never relax in the house. Like I was breathing too loud if we were. So that would be like an excuse to freak out. Or she was always telling me she's going to kill herself. Like, how would you like if I slit my wrists and the blood would pour out? And I'm like, what? And she's like, so what do you want for dinner? Like, she'd be crying, and then it would flip over like 5 minutes.
Too much.
Crazy stuff. Or even like like really being sexual around the first boyfriend I brought back, but then making me look like I was the child. Like all of a sudden, like even though I was working, she like went the first boyfriend I brought back, he was a little bit older than me, but she was like flirting with him, and then was like, here's €2, make sure you get yourself some sweets, but like rubbing herself up against him, like crazy.
This is your mother.
Yeah, and then she'd always say I'd be pregnant by the time I was 16. So that's another thing. If anything happened, I wouldn't have been able to. She was like, I know you're going to be a whore. I know you're going to. But like, 32, still not pregnant, bitch. Might be barren. Who knows? But yeah.
Maybe it wasn't my decision, but.
And then it would be like really friendly, happy, like we're buds. But then like I would say like, I had a salad at Dad's and it was so nice, and she'd be like, oh, you're saying I'm a terrible mother, and you're like, what? And it was just like anything you said would be twisted.
Oh no.
Or one time I was like, she was throwing shit at me, and I was like, she was screaming so loud, I wasn't screaming, but a neighbor came in and he was like, what is going on? And then she was like, oh, Katie pulled a prank that there was a mouse, isn't that true? And I was like, yeah, that's true. And he was like, okay. So it's like you never had like, because people don't want to get involved, like you got involved to the point of being, but it's just like, it was just mental. There's loads of stories as well how mental it was, but
there's such liars.
When's the last time you talked to her?
It'll be, so I'm 32. What's that minus? It was 18 when I.
Oh, literally, like it was cold after that.
Yeah. She tried to. She did write a letter to her. She got her sister to write a letter to get me cancelled off my podcast, but it was to an agency that I'm not represented by, bitch. Oh. I'm not that successful.
How petty is that?
That's unreal. So she's like, hey, I'm her mother. She's a whatever. Like.
Well, we talked a bit about it. I didn't get into details, and there is like really horrific stuff that she's done that if I did. Like, of course, she would be like embarrassed, or she would be upset, or she would be angry. And it's because like, you're a horrible person. You shouldn't have done that stuff. But
and they should be embarrassed. Yeah. That's the thing that really drives me crazy about parents like that. If they were sensible, they would be embarrassed, but they're not. So they feel like instead of like taking ownership and being accountable, they just get angrier at the person that they abuse.
Instead of like reaching, because I never said, me and my co-host at the time just talked about him because he had experienced similar emotional abuse, and him and his mother had actually resolved it, and she'd gone to therapy and she'd quit drinking. And so with me, it was like, no, it hasn't been resolved. And but we did talk about what the effects of emotional abuse. I never went into actual detailed stories, maybe like one, but nothing too graphic. And it is fucked up. And I know it is. And it's graphic. And I remember even when I my cousin one time being like, would you talk to her? And I told her one story and she started to cry. And then she was like, why didn't you ever tell us this? And I go, because nobody asked. And like, that's do you know what I mean? Like, what am I going to do? But anyway, side note to that, I didn't even say anything bad, but I know that they were trying to control the narrative. So they said, if you say abuse, it sounds like she sexually abused her, like talking about my mother. And it's like, no, it doesn't. I'm not saying that.
Right.
And then my cousin told me that her mother said something to her about it, and then she was like to her mother, did you actually listen to the episode, because Katie didn't actually say anything bad? And so they already went on this vengeance, but then her mother listened and she was like, oh yeah, she didn't really say anything bad, it's actually fine. But anyway,
where do you think this ends? I'm just like, I don't know, I have such a good, like a very weird relationship with my mom, to be honest, but I'm always thinking like my success in my career with her involved in it. So like, do you think you'll ever like make
I remember my dad
not encouraging you to. I'm just
but I remember my dad once being like, because I think he felt guilt. He obviously feels guilty about it all, and he said something like, like I feel, because he has a weird relationship with his mother as well. If anybody listens to this, don't say it back, because theirs is ongoing. But I do see the way being older, seeing the way theirs is, it makes a lot of sense to me, like why he wouldn't have seen that this isn't okay, or why he ended up with someone like my mother. But he did be like, oh, like I don't want you to ever have any regrets, like I don't want you to ever think that you can't like have a relationship with her. And I'm like, no, I can't have a relationship with her because it makes me crazy. When you talk to her, your reality changes. I feel that. Because it's not, you're in a different world, you're in her world that makes no sense. Every word you say out of your mouth is going to be used against you. You're going to be manipulated, you're going to be gaslit, you're going to be asked for money, you're going to have expectations put on you that aren't fair. And even like when I did cut her off a few years later, she started sleeping with the boss of the bar that I worked. So even though she knew I'd cut her off, respect. And the best thing she ever did was, everybody else contacted me and she did all these manipulative things, but the best thing she ever did, which she wouldn't even realize, was not actually try to contact me. So even though it would make sense about the podcast, let's talk about it. This is the best, because I don't ever want her in my life again. But she would come to the bar and she would dry hump him in front of me while I would pick up glasses. So this is like maybe 4 years after I'd cut her off, and nobody at work knew she was my mother. They found out a little bit later because someone had to have a fucking big mouth. Some guy I went to school with, because the two, actually it's funny because the Alex guy who, sorry I said your name, he actually works with me and he knew and he never said anything, because he was kind of like, oh, I know that they've estranged. Good man. And then his friend, one night we were all out and they were like, oh, the boss's new slut, like she's like, oh, we got complaints at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday that she was all over him, like what's she doing, like she's such a whore. And then the other kid we went to school with, so there's 3 of us, he got up and he was like, why are you talking about Katie's mum like that? And then I was like, and everybody was like, Katie, we've been bitching about this for like months, why didn't you tell us? And then I was just like, yeah, I don't have any association with her, I'm estranged from her, and I didn't want you guys to think that her behavior is linked to mine, because fucking who knows what she could do.
That shit will happen.
And then my boyfriend at the time was just like, yeah, everybody just get back to work and don't worry about it, Katie's not offended, like we both, we knew or whatever, and it's not a big deal. But yeah, so that was like, that's how like she even came in to have a meal, and thankfully one of the older women who was like the head server, she was like a substitute mother for me for a few years. She saw that saw his name down, the boss, and she knew that he would come in. So when she saw them walking in, she goes, Katie, you're on your break. And then I just went down and took my break. But like, that's crazy. Right. You know that this is a person, and you're just coming in to be like like you can't even have a rational conversation with a person like that. Yeah. Or a person who your husband leaves, your daughter leaves, and she was abusive to my grandmother as well. And they all act like, anyway, you still don't go, oh, maybe I should go see a therapist. You don't go, I'm the problem. Yeah. So why? I'll never, ever, because what's going to happen? She's going to try to fuck my boyfriend? No. Steal my baby? No.
You can't insert rational thoughts into people like that. Yeah. Like my mom would like whoop my ass and curse me out, and then 10 minutes later, like, let me borrow $500. Yeah. And you're like financially abusive, like, you know what? That's a new one.
Actually, you deserve that, mom.
She's like, I think you should be paying rent. I'm like, I'm 16. Right. Why nobody's paying rent at 16? Like, but you got a job. I'm like, you're terrible. Right. We jump out this window. But yeah, parents are. Well, my mom wasn't a whore, luckily. Like.
Mine was, mine liked, well, you know what? No shame in though. On that part, I'm like, what? But I mean, leave other people's husbands alone for sure. But yeah, she definitely was. But it's just funny because she was very sexual and loved her sexuality and would like dress like that and all that, and no shame on that. But then that meant that as a young girl in the house, there was like strange men in the house sometimes, you know.
And you guys all have the same sibling?
No, they're from my stepmom. So my stepmom's amazing. But she had a guy once from like Amsterdam just like move in.
Oh Lord.
And he was just living in her house for 3 months. Yeah. And then she kicked him out because she thought he was like, she started to get convinced that he had a son that he didn't tell her about just because he had an old picture of himself as a kid. But she did do, Let's like, and she did like do stuff in front of him. Like she would love to like make out like I was like this really evil child. So she would like do stuff in front of him. And she did do one really specific fucked up thing, but I don't know how dark I can get on this podcast. So
it's super dark.
Yeah, dark.
Are you sure?
It's the dark.
Okay.
It's the darkest.
It's really dark. And nobody tell anybody in Ireland because I don't want my mother being like, because this is a story I didn't share on my podcast because I'm just like, it's not fucking worth it. But this is one of the things which I'm sure she wouldn't want me to share. But let's say, so when it comes to like being like a young woman, you don't really know about period and stuff. And in Ireland, they're not great with it. They kind of just send you out into the fields, figure it out, you know. But there's a lot of and it's still to this day, like they just got a tampon ad taken off the TV in Ireland. So we need to be better educated in Ireland. Like they were like, it's too sexual. And it's like, no, it's helpful, you fucking idiots. But anyway, so I don't necessarily blame her on not being great with that sort of stuff because a lot of parents aren't. But what I do blame her on was I put a used pad in the bin in the bathroom, and we were minding my cousin's dogs. This is so uncomfortable for all the men in the room. I'm so sorry.
There's only men in the room.
Getting an education. And the dog took it out of the bin and just like was running around with it because it was an open bin. And like, that's not the dog's fault. Like, it's fine. But she like called me and screamed at me to come home. But in front of the man, she was like holding it up, like the used, waving it around that I'm like dirty and disgusting.
How old were you?
I was like 14, maybe 13.
Crap.
That's so tough for a 14-year-old girl to deal with.
And then also I was like, I didn't know that they are meant to go into the bin, but then for years afterwards, I mean like up until my 20s, I didn't know where they were meant to go. So I would just take them, wrap them up, put them in my bag, and then like put them in a bin outside because if I were in people's houses. But then I remember a friend being like, no, that's what the bin in the just put that in the bin, you're fine.
And the dog did nothing wrong. Finders keepers.
Right.
Yeah, the dog, like, but she was like that I was dirty, that I should have known to put it in some magic. I still was never told where the magical place is that they go.
Right.
But yeah, it was a lot of like instilling shame and no matter what, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So
that's generational too.
Yeah.
Like nobody hates women's bodies more than older women. Older women.
But even to show that random guy who was like only in the house like 3 months until she kicked him out, but that was like crazy.
Yeah, she was on some watch this shit. Like that's the worst show. That's the worst kind.
The what?
I think he was trying to like
the worst kind of abuse would be like to like show everyone that I can make an example of her by
and some strange man.
Parents who use public humiliation as a disciplinary technique. Like when the kid will get bad grades and like, all right, we're gonna cut off all your hair. It's like, why don't you try talking to him instead of just trying to embarrass them?
But it's also like I didn't do anything that deserves to be disciplined.
Except be born a girl.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with putting it in the bin. It's not like I left it open on her bed, or do you know what I mean? It's not like I fed it to the dog.
You didn't put it in her pillowcase. Like.
That was the thing. I would get disciplined for things that don't need to. There's no discipline here. That's where it's abuse because it's like there's no reason. It's you can't even understand it because it's like in what world whatever she's experiencing is not in our reality because it doesn't make any sense. But yeah.
Damn.
Anyway, that's sad. I'm on my period right now as well, so it's probably why I was a little sensitive about the timing issue. It's like I'm messing.
Yeah.
Damn. Well, your mom sucks.
Right.
Yeah, she does suck.
Yeah, she's pretty shitty, man. You know, one thing that always
give people benefit of the doubt. Go ahead.
One thing that always bothered me is like when people who don't have kids criticize parenting, and parents are like, "Don't talk about parenting unless you have kids." It's like I don't have to be a dog owner to like have an idea of how to take care of a dog, right?
Yeah.
I don't have to be a dentist to know what like clean teeth are supposed to look like. So this idea that like you have to be a parent to like have a say in what parenting looks like. Like, yeah, I've never been maybe I have been a parent, but I know what it's like to be a child.
Right.
Yeah.
Everyone knows what it's like to be a child. So like, I think everyone should have a voice as to what good parenting should look like. Even if you haven't been a parent yet.
Also, the people who say that continue to have kids. And I'm like, sorry, was it really that hard? You popped out 4 more. Like, I mean, I'm sure it's hard, but also you could have stopped.
Yeah.
I hate when people do that. It's like, again, anybody who decides to have a kid, you have to have the kid and know that they're going to have their own life. Everybody who has kids should go through therapy, because I know a big part of it, I look exactly like my father. I don't look like my mother at all. So I think I was a constant reflection of someone who rejected her, who got away. But I do think parents do instill their own insecurities. So, and my mother's obsessed with her looks. So as she was aging, I was becoming a young adult or whatever. So that was also, but I think that's the things you have to be like, gone to therapy, be cool with your insecurities. Because of course your kid is you're going to age and your kid's going to live its life. It's going to leave you. It's going to travel to a different country, and that has to be okay.
Yeah.
Like Esther Perel, she says that, I'll watch Esther Perel because she'll help. Because she says stuff like, when you try to make your kids stay or you try to control it, that actually pushes them away. Look at me and my mother. We'll never speak again. Yeah. Whereas if you let them go, like my dad, like, oh my God, yeah, go to America, enjoy it. Like my brother's in Edinburgh, go to Edinburgh. And of course, I'm sure he would love if we all settled in the fucking shithole. Not his house is lovely, and I shouldn't say the area is a shithole, but in comparison to New York, it's actually very lovely the older I get. But as an 18-year-old, it was like there's fucking nothing to do, which is great now. Like the older I'm getting, like that'd be lovely. But I mean, he was like, I'm sure he'd love if we all settled there, but he's like, no, go live your life. And so we come back. I come back twice a year. My brother comes back. You know what I mean? It's like and we have a great relationship, and it's like you have to know when they become adults and know when to. Yeah, just not be like, my dad never got to live abroad. He would have loved to. I fucked that up, you know?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, he should have worn a condom, but because I know it was an accident. But the point is, he doesn't look at me and go, oh, she gets to live her life. Or he didn't like.
That's beautiful.
Even with the money, he was like, no, you don't know what's going to happen. You got to keep putting that into savings. You know, like he's not. Yeah, so that's the way that makes for healthy relationships going forward.
So, Claire, you have how much time do you have?
3 minutes.
Okay. All right, so you have a kid. How do you think about raising your kid with all this in mind?
Well, my mom was a great model of what not to do.
Right.
So, like, I try to think of everything that she did, and I do the opposite.
Yeah.
So, like, my mom wasn't very.
It's really my dad. We should get my dad's thing printed.
Yeah.
The guy should be a Yoda.
Like, my mom didn't communicate to me. She didn't use her words except to, like, curse me out and yell. So, like, I only talk to my daughter in a calm voice when I'm in, like, and I talk to her all the time. Like, hey, don't do that. You know, I'm just always just using my regular talking voice with her. I don't put my hands on my kids. Right. I'm never going to be that guy, because I always want to be looked at as a person who she can come to for sanctuary. Yeah. I want to be the safest space in the world. I want her to know that when she's with me, she's always protected. Right. I always have her back, and I always have her best interests at heart. And I never had that confidence in my parents. Right. I was never able to look at my mom and say, hey, I can trust her with this information without being fearful of backlash, being fearful of being disciplined for trusting her with information.
And used against you in the future.
And used against it, or being manipulated by that information I'm trusting her with, or knowing that whatever I entrust her with, she's going to tell her sister and her sister's friends and my cousins and my uncles so like, that's just, I just want to make sure that my daughter sees me as what I always imagined I wanted to see my mother as. And I know that I'll never get that with my mother, but I can do my damnness to provide that for my daughter.
Yeah.
And I also know that she doesn't owe me anything ever.
Yeah, that's right.
Ever. She's never going to owe me anything.
Yeah.
I brought her into this world. She's my responsibility. She doesn't owe me a thank you. She doesn't owe me an I love you. She doesn't owe me anything. Yeah. I owe it to her. So I'm never going to look at her as a person who's like, I can't believe she didn't call me on my birthday. I cannot believe she forgot that today's Valentine's Day and I'm lonely. Right. I cannot believe
after all that I did, then you're over here like,
because parents love to hold the things that they did over their child, but that's what you're supposed to do.
No,
like, I worked 3 jobs because you didn't have a good college education.
Right. Yeah.
Like, you worked 3 jobs because you had to. You were going to be homeless too. It's not like I was just going to be homeless by myself. Like, you had to work 3 jobs. That's what being in America is sometimes. So this idea that parents are like, yeah, I worked so hard for you. It's like, yeah, you did. Right. But guess what? Even if I wasn't here, you would still have to have a job.
200%. If I was any other son, you'd have to do all this.
And it's not like it takes that much feeding, okay?
Right.
I mean, I literally lived off microwavable pizzas because my mom was afraid of the oven. So
Yeah, so just make sure that like if you're gonna have children, you know what I mean, make sure you treat them as human beings. A lot of people treat dogs better. Like, I would never hit my dog and would beat the shit out of their kids. It's like, what are you doing? I would never yell at my cat. It's like, you're yelling. You told me you wish I would die yesterday, but you wouldn't yell at your cat.
It's also like when you're in a relationship and you just get mad at your partner, like, why would you do that, blah, blah, blah. Your partner shuts down. And whereas if you're just like, hey, just from my perspective, this made me feel this way. And I'm just like, you know, why did you do that? Or what, you know, you just have a talk, like the Jared Fried says, like the negotiation table. I feel like that's the same with kids. Like, so if you're just gonna go, blah, 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 the kid's not even listening. But if you're like, hey, this is actually why this isn't a healthy thing to do, or this isn't like, you shouldn't like, I can't, you know, she shouldn't hit your friend at school because that hurts her. You know what I mean? You know, just, I mean, I feel like they'll understand more and then develop an emotional intelligence better quicker, so then when I fucking date them later I don't have to do the work. But yeah,
this sounds for me.
Katie, cool. You've been so great.
Katie, awesome.
Thank you. This is fun.
I want to hear more stories, and I know you got more, and I want to get into more of those. So I definitely have
got
to
the
have
list wrote down that I didn't even. Let me read out the list so that you.
No, you have to
I'm not going to say what it is. I'll just say the headlines.
Okay.
Well, I did say family, grandmother, mother. So we did cover mother, great grandfather. Dark Irish folklore. Ex-Russian guy stabbed himself.
See, that would have been a good one.
That's a teaser for the next one. Yeah, for part 2.
Well, next time we have you on, we're gonna be starting on time.
Yeah, 100%.
No, it's fine. Just maybe do it. Don't do it in 28 days. Yeah. I'll be on my period again. Or I'll eat before. I just panicked because I was like, shit, I've scheduled my dinner wrong, but it's okay. I love you guys.
But thank you so much. You're the best. We'll have you on again very soon.
Yeah, great.
And thanks for joining us.
Oh, wait. Katie Boyle comic. Thanks.
At Katie Boyle for Katie everyone Boyle. Who doesn't speak Irish.
K-A-T-I-E.
Thanks. Bye.
Boyle.
Love yous.
All right, guys. Bye.
Bye.